On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Rehgan Bleile. She's the co-founder and CEO at AlignAI. We're going to be talking about her journey from a nonprofit to an AI. She has actually co-founded this nonprofit, and I'm going to have her tell you all about it. She definitely has progressed into a for-profit business, and now we want to understand some of those differences, the skills required, what she learned, what the takeaways were. Kind of excited to learn all about your journey, Rehgan. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about it.
All right, before we start, I mentioned AlignAI and I mentioned a nonprofit. I wanted you to maybe tell us a little bit about both those before we start.
Sure. So AlignAI is a governance and adoption platform for enterprises to essentially help them manage their AI solutions, use cases, and policies and procedures for AI. So we started that company, my co-founder Brendan and I, about 4 years ago. And we're super passionate about helping organizations integrate AI into their operations. So that's AlignAI. I'm very excited to be working on that problem full-time now. And Women in Analytics is the other organization that I originally started back in 2016. Our entire mission of that organization is to provide more visibility to women and diverse voices in the AI data and analytics space. So we started a conference, we have a community, we have mentorship programs, all sorts of things that we've established as a part of that organization.
And we'll first start off talking about Women in Analytics. I think, before when we'd spoken about it, obviously you guys just recently had a conference. I guess tell us a little bit about what that conference was and a little bit more information in terms of, because I think you mentioned a couple of things to me about the nonprofit, the WIA, that's kind of unique in terms of how you help the community to set some context for everyone.
Absolutely. So we did just have our big event last week, which is very exciting. It's one of the big things that we do. And part of our mission, as I mentioned, for providing visibility is to really just get women and diverse individuals out there and get their voices heard. So actually, I did a TED Talk on this about, 5 years ago at this point, and really just getting women to be seen, heard, and found are kind of the biggest objectives for us as an organization. And there are a lot of ways to do that, one of which is obviously getting women on stage to talk about their work. So, there's tons of spaces that have been created out there for women in this, AI data and analytics to talk about being women, but that's not our area of focus as an organization. We really just want to get together as practitioners and talk about what's working, what's not, what are the latest trends, what are some of the deep dives and techniques that people are applying, whether it's in research and academia, or if it's in industry, or if it's at a startup. And so that's been kind of the essence of the organization since its inception. And then during COVID, we launched an online membership. And so now we've got about 8,000 members, a part of our organization from around the world. And so we do both. We've got our membership now and our big event that we host every year.
Yeah, I guess it shows you guys started in 2016. That was before data AI became a hot topic. Obviously, data has been always at the forefront and very important to businesses, but nothing like we've seen in the last decade in terms of the explosion of analytics. What have you seen in terms of supporting, as a nonprofit, supporting getting people that are diverse, that into the data and analytics space to kind of help bring some of that focus and attention?
Yeah, so I always like to say that I'm living a part of our second AI hype cycle. The first one was much smaller. So, there were a lot of companies that were looking into the roles of data scientists back in 2015, 2016 is when the big, article came out about data science being the sexiest job or something like that. So this is kind of the second hype cycle. This one's, again, much bigger. And so at the time, we were really just trying to create a community where we could find more women working on AI and analytics in general. And so there was a decent community. Our first event, we had 200 people show up to it. And it was a local kind of grassroots effort. And then obviously got much bigger over the years. And in the last couple of years now, we're starting to figure out how do we incorporate more non-technical folks into this conversation as well, because the conversation really came out of originally in academia, in research, and then how do companies take that research and leverage those insights and intelligence to become more profitable. And now we're at this point where we're getting towards self-service, and how do we enable non-technical folks to build and use AI, and work with data, by the way. Like, obviously data literacy is still really big. So there's all of these different types of folks who have been a part of the conversation over the years, and we want to continue to make sure that there's diverse representation in each of those phases.
I love it. I think, when it comes to data analytics, data science, I don't remember the exact quote about data scientists, but I do remember the article. I remember reading and thinking that seems like a lot of pressure for people to move into data science. And at that time, I still think we were early days to figure out what that role. And I still think even a decade later, when you ask companies to define a data scientist, there's still a struggle to really define what that role is. So it's quite interesting that it can be a lot of different things to different people. As someone that founded that entity, the WIA, when you look back and you start thinking about the effort it took, I mean, you guys just had one of your biggest events now. When you're looking back and kind of thinking as the founder, as the CEO of a nonprofit, what were some of the challenges that you had to go through to get that community up? And the reason I'm asking is probably a lot of people out there would love to. It'd be great for a lot of people to start some type of nonprofit, get people to show up. This is a dream for a lot of people. It sounds really easy. Hey, I'm going to throw an event and people are going to be, but there's got to be some challenges. You had 200 people show up at the first one, which was a great start, but you have to do more to kind of keep the promotion, the interest. I mean, talk to us a little bit about kind of that scaling process.
Yeah, I think when you're doing something, especially that has a social good element to it, you have to sit back and think about motivation. So when you think about typical charities, right, whether it's something supporting cancer or something supporting some sort of disease, usually people give when they've been personally impacted by that situation. And when you think about what we're doing now, it's much harder to get people to focus funds in social good towards something so specific and niche, aside from all the other things that they are funding. And so you almost have to think for profit, right? Like, you have to think about what creates a motivation for someone to fund something. And that is exactly what we did when we started it. We had to step back and say, what are people going to pay for and why are they going to pay for it? And it can't just be to make them feel good. That can't be the motivator, because you will run out of money. So we have to find ways of being taken seriously, which I know sounds a little weird, but like, I've mentioned this before very publicly, but when you run a group or an organization that supports, a demographic like women, sometimes that can be seen as like cute and not taking, in a legitimate way. Like, okay, a bunch of women are getting together and they're talking about being women, and so who's going to buy a ticket to show up to that? And I think that's what's hard, is you've got to create this, it's not an illusion. You've got to create this like perception of it being something worth spending money on. And so when we were thinking about designing it, we were like, how do we do that? And number one was get the best of the best speakers, the best of the best content, things that people will show up and pay for to learn, regardless of whether or not there's a woman or a guy standing on stage. So that became really important to us. Highest quality meant like people are going to think about their budgets of where they're going to spend money on going to a conference this year, and they're going to put us in the same bucket as Gartner or Open Data Science Conference or any of these other events. And if we aren't quality enough, they're not going to pick ours. And so that was something we took very, very seriously. So how can we both do good for what we're trying to do and our mission, and then also at the same time produce something super high quality? And I feel like that's what's kept us growing and kept us around over the years. When we go and talk to sponsors or vendors or companies to be a part of it and provide funds towards us, we have to make a justification, a financial justification. You're going to acquire really good talent. You're going to get in front of decision makers and people with budgets to sell your product or services. Like, we have to do that. So doing both at the same time is fairly exhausting. Because on the one hand, we have to be competitive and we have to be better. And on the other, we are also adding this other element that's really important to us and makes us mission driven.
That's fantastic, by the way. And I'm listening, and I heard the word intentionality, and I heard the way you talked about the steps, the mindset, and you said to think about it as a for-profit, not as a non-for-profit. And we're going to segue into, I'm curious about AlignAI as well. There's one thing that I've noticed, that when people go down the direction of wanting to build a community, it could be any community they want, sometimes they feel that if they build it, people will come. We could argue that for about for-profit businesses. If you build it, they'll come. And I think what you just outlined was that intentionality and understanding that motivation, not over-indexing and taxing people on the social good because eventually you go bankrupt there. I think those are all excellent points of anyone that is for-profit, non-for-profit. And obviously, I was going to ask you. You've been running this entity for quite a number of years now, correct?
Yes, 8 years.
8 years. And along the way, you mentioned takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of effort, a lot of intentionality. Along the way, you've launched AlignAI, which is a separate company for the last several years as well. I guess, having seen the effort of the WIA and kind of what it took to do that, did you just want to start and rebuild something from scratch? What was the motivation to want to go through and build a second entity?
I got the entrepreneurship bug like a decade ago. So it just happened. And at the time, I was an engineer in college. I went to Ohio State, and actually my co-founder at AlignAI and I were both accepted to go to Startup Week in Austin, Texas. And I got there, instantly fell in love with startups. Now, the degree I was obtaining was very obsessed with funneling talent into corporations. So they had really strong partnerships with Fortune 1000 companies. And so most of my fellow students were going that path. And I fell in love with the startup ecosystem. I don't know what it was. I know my dad's an entrepreneur, so maybe it was that. Maybe I was inspired by that and then kind of got exposed to it. But I worked for my first startup in Austin. I got an internship at a company called Step One, which is no longer around. And from there on, I always worked at startups. I always worked at companies, and I learned so much from other entrepreneurs, and I watched them do things well, and I watched them do things that weren't so good. And I think for a little while, you're not quite sure if you're ready to become an entrepreneur or if you're one of those really good supporter roles in a startup. And so for me, I was very unsure. And for a long time, I was like, yeah, entrepreneurship's not for me. However, I do love working for entrepreneurs. Until I launched Women in Analytics and I became an entrepreneur. And I did it on the side for a number of years. So I would work all day at my startup, and then all night until like 2 a.m. I would work on this organization, weekends, you name it. In fact, I was just laughing about some of the early events. I had sponsors shipping their stuff to my apartment downtown. And I would load it all in my car, and I would take it to the event center myself, and I packed all of the swag bags myself. I printed all the badges. I did all the work. And eventually it became a lot. So I got a team, and I figured out how to build it and how to get that team and how to create that brand. And I worked on all the finances and all the marketing and all the sales. And, I was like, oh, I actually can do this. it's a little intimidating at first. And working at an MLOps company with Brendan, we both saw a huge need in the market, which was helping companies actually adopt AI, because they had these data scientists who were building things and no one was using them. And so we had the idea, we saw the opportunity, we had really good market timing, in my opinion, because we started it 4 years ago. And I felt confident in my ability to be an entrepreneur and a leader. And so we took the leap into that full-blown, tech startup life. And so I feel like WIA has helped me in a lot of ways. One, I've been very fulfilled giving back to the community. I've met some absolutely incredible people who have spoken at our conference over the years. And I also kind of cut my teeth on entrepreneurship in a fairly low risk setting.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's the story is fantastic, because I think a lot of people would probably have skipped the WIA and gone straight to the startup, right? And that would be the first place where they're going to get experience running a company, get experience dealing with the finances, dialing in the intentionality, all those little things that you've mentioned would be the first time for a lot of people. I find it great and amazing, fantastic that you actually had all that learning, and you said in a low risk environment. I would actually argue, push back. I go, people are spending money to show up. They'll be up in arms, and your nonprofit be down the drain if they don't keep continuing supporting. So I think there's a different type of pressure. So I think pressure is pressure, it's just different. The more I hear you speak, and the more I listen about the differences between the two, and I was going to ask you about some of the skill sets that you had to acquire to run AlignAI, because obviously there's a lot of similarities. Was there anything in particular that you thought, once you were running a for-profit, we'll actually be very clear about that for-profit entity, was there any skills that you were like, these are things that while at WIA, I just didn't get a chance to develop?
Yes, in a couple of different ways, right? Because I'm building a venture-backed company with AlignAI. So the growth is different, the trajectory is different, the product development is there. They're two somewhat different spaces, although lots of overlap on, buyers and personas. We are a B2B company, so we strictly sell to Fortune 1000 companies. And so, go to market's different. The type of team you build is different. The financial structure is different. The growth goals are different. Your skill set flexes in different ways. So, and there's still a lot of overlap, right? There's marketing and press that are still somewhat similar, right? Like, I'm still looking for news outlets to get the conference promoted and to get AlignAI known. There's still some overlap in some of the things that I learned, the basics of getting a financial model in place and budgeting, and what you spend that money on is different, but the fact that you have one is the same. And the core functions of that, being a leader, learning how to delegate, those are all the same. There are different scales, but they're still similar skills. And I learned the hard lessons of leadership and delegation at WIA. I didn't have that experience before. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap, but there's some things that are very fundamentally different, especially when you get into business model, finances, growth, all of those elements, and truly what you're building. I was building a conference and an event in a community. So what you're building and who you need to build that is very different than building a technology product. And so, yeah, lots of overlap, but lots of things that I did for the first time at AlignAI too.
You mentioned intentionality around WIA, and that was a big, to me, that was a big piece of understanding success. When it comes to AlignAI and intentionality, how do you apply some of that same mindset to the current company, or the current for-profit company?
I think the intentionality is a little different, and has been actually over the last couple of years, just because of the market, right? So we were building a company in which some people paid attention to and understood what we were doing, but broadly was not the number one pain at companies at the time. So we were doing a lot of educating, and we were saying, listen, we have done this a million times and we've seen this problem, and we can help you with that. Whereas the last 2 years, it's actually cutting through the noise. So there are a ton of AI startups now, and they're all trying to solve somewhat similar problems. And so when we think about intentionality, it's what are we uniquely skilled to do? And how are we uniquely positioned in the market to solve a very acute problem? And how are we approaching it differently? So, when I think about WIA and our intentionality there, you look at the landscape and you look at where are people going and how can you provide a differentiated experience for someone at a conference. And I argue we do a lot of things very different than other conferences still to this day. And actually, it's quite hard now because everyone now owns an AI conference. So there's a lot more kind of competition for that budget and that dollar. So I think it's all about unique positioning and how you can continue to establish your brand and establish what you're providing as unique in the market. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus, especially now with a ton of noise.
I was going to say, I know you got to get back to running AlignAI, and obviously you got a lot on your plate. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your story, how both entities started, and kind of the learning experiences. I think it's fantastic for people to hear. I really do appreciate that. If somebody's going to want to reach out, maybe just follow up, you do have two distinct bodies of experience to kind of draw from. What's a good way of somebody connecting with you to kind of tap you on the shoulder if they want to follow up with you?
For sure. LinkedIn's great. Definitely go over to LinkedIn and send me a note. I'm always happy to chat. Bear with me as I navigate the black hole that is my LinkedIn inbox, but it is the best way at this point to contact me. So yeah, head on over there, Rehgan Bleile, or you can follow AlignAI on LinkedIn as well, or of course, Women in Analytics. You can head on over to the website, and there's lots of opportunities to get involved in that organization as well.
Awesome. We'll include some of those links so people can find you, find Women in Analytics as well. Again, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Two things. One, I really think the journey from a nonprofit to AI startup, obviously different experiences, lots of overlap. I think Rehgan did a great job of walking us through what it took. I really think there's a lot here to take away if you want to start a nonprofit or you're interested in being a startup founder. Lots of experiences she shared. So please share this with someone else that might benefit from listening to her experience. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you guys. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.